Now, recently, and by recently I mean less than a month ago, there was an article published in Psychology Today talking about some recent discoveries that were found out via Pew reporting poll. Now, at the outset, I should say one should always be circumspect and careful about self-reporting when people are asked or interviewed about what their preferences are, what they like. And there are many reasons for this, but probably the best reason is that humans don't understand themselves very well. We don't. We largely operate on autopilot, hence any sort of self-reporting is notoriously unreliable. But sometimes self-reporting is the best you can do. And so what this Pew report did was it interviewed some 5,000 individuals across various ages as to their preferences, their likes, dislikes, inclinations with respect to the dating and mating market. And the results surprised some people, and other people, the results didn't surprise at all. And very, very roughly, the gist of it is that fully half of the people after a certain age, roughly 40, have no interest in dating, mating, etc., etc. And this includes men and women. And furthermore, this is then broken down into different categories as the reasons why they don't particularly want to date or mate. One of the obvious reasons is just getting older. Because in general, as you get older, the time horizon you have to do things before oblivion claims you becomes ever smaller, so you don't have the same opportunities. And after a certain point, it probably just doesn't make sense to maniacally pursue the dating life in order to find a partner when you're only a few years from croaking anyway. So that's a very basic one. And they did ask people if that was a factor. Am I too old? Are you too old? And again, self-reporting, some of them put it that way. I think a lot of it, though, ultimately can be broken down to that, which is to say that given the time expenditure, the efforts are probably not worth it. So the breakdown in terms of age categories is as follows. These are people who are interviewed, as I said. Uninterested in romantic relationships or dating, 37% ages 18 to 29, 39% 30 to 49, 50% 50 to 64, and unsurprisingly, 75% ages 65 plus. And within that, it's further broken down between men and women. So it says at ages 40 and above, more than 7 in 10 women, 71%, are completely uninterested in dating or romantic relationships, compared to 42% of men. Among the younger adults, the difference is just 39% for the women, compared to 33% for the men. And we can go into the differences between the men and women, but I think it's pretty obvious in this case what's operative, what's going on here. A woman's sexual market value does plummet much more rapidly with age. And so at age 40 plus, she's well past her prime, and therefore it's going to be much more difficult to gain and, more importantly, retain the attention of a man. Men like youth and beauty, we all know this. So that's part of the equation. The other part of the equation is probably everyone's favorite word, hypergamy. What's operative here? Women who, for a variety of reasons, never really bought into the dating market, and probably through excessive choosiness and pickiness, basically over time push themselves out of the dating market, which I think would explain why roughly 71%, according to this Pew poll, of women past the age of 40 have no interest in dating and mating, compared to 42% of men who are still interested in this. Because assuming men have gathered resources, of course, they can continue engaging in this stuff, and possibly their peak value, though probably is around the mid to late 30s, all things considered, is still there to some degree. It's still viable. However, 42% is still a significant number, and that requires explanation as well. Of course, it also explains the more minimal difference between the younger adults, 39% of women compared to 33% of men. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty much the same. And we can just chalk this up to the fact that women have their peak fertility when they're younger, and therefore they're going to be much more available and therefore interested potentially. And though for men you wouldn't argue that they have their peak fertility, they're a bunch of horn dogs, right? So that would explain that. In general, dating and mating is the province of youth. That's when the hormones are being churned out. That's when human beings are most driven to engage in these sorts of activities. More broadly and generally, the two main reasons cited repeatedly, especially for the older age categories, were that people were quote-unquote happy being single, or they had more important priorities. Now, again, self-reporting, and it's very vague, but I think we can sort of interpret what's being said here. By saying you have more important priorities, I think oftentimes people really mean that they're looking at a cost-benefit in terms of how much time they need to spend on said activity versus the returns on said activity. And when there are more important priorities, supposedly, I think that's a way of saying there are other things I can engage in, other things I can do that will probably yield better results. I think that coincides with being single or saying that you're happier being single for the following reason. Because basically what I'm saying is that these categories aren't necessarily distinct. The mating and dating game is notoriously treacherous, as we all know. And when you're on your own and you set yourself to a task, well, it's reasonable to expect that you can get some results, you can do something. When you involve other people, even at the workplace, a team, everyone needs to come through on their end. Everyone needs to do their part. And mating and dating is a bit like that in some respect. And you don't have as much influence or control. There are a lot more random variables at play. And so that's why I think there's a lot of overlap between these two categories, liking being single past a certain age and just having other priorities. Now, I want to get to the really interesting part here, and that is they conducted similar surveys back in 2005, so 15 years ago, before social media really took over, before there were things like the influence of YouTube and infamous Twitter and everyone's favorite boogeyman and easy to point to boogeyman, Tinder. And before, of course, online dating really, really took off. Because I think we have the tendency to get overly absorbed in social media and then as a consequence misinterpret things. And guess what? The results were more or less the same. They were off by 1% or 2%. All the self-reporting conducted at the time, 2005, versus 2020, were basically the same. Again, off by 1% or 2%, not significant at all. And I think this tells us something, that there are a fair bit of constants involved in human behavior and human nature. Sure, you can have environmental influence, and social media is one. I think there are areas where social media completely makes us haywire and act bonkers, and other areas where we're a little bit more robust in terms of our preferences and inclinations as human apes. And I think the dating and mating market is one of them, especially once you get past a certain age. Because however we want to interpret the data, there is that general push and pull effect, this expectation that people in general must engage in these sorts of activities, dating and mating. And again, the reasons why men don't do it and women don't do it are different. I think what this is telling us is much more that people feel less pressure to engage in the game. Now, the fact that this was more or less the same in 2005 as it was in 2020 tells us a lot, which is to say that there are constants at play, and that there are always going to be people out there who are not interested in certain things, even if those certain things are regarded as very normative and conventional and something that you should do. As was already said, the reasons why women decide that it's not worth their time versus men are quite different. I suspect, again, as I've mentioned, that increased age with standards that are in the stratosphere prevent women from really even wanting something like that. And more to the point, let's be honest, they would not be happy with the things or content with the things that they could get, especially at that age. And for that matter, at a much younger age, women are notoriously discontent with what they can get, hence why hypergamy exists, always climbing that ladder. In the case of the men, they probably really are doing that cost-benefit analysis much more readily and saying, look, I can do X number of tasks, I can play X number of games, I can learn X number of things, or I can waste my time going on dates, spending time and money, and it all amounts to nothing at the end of the day. I think that's what's going on here. I'd say also that it's a shame that we don't have data from 30 years ago or 40 or 50 years ago when arguably things were a lot more different. I'm not saying that 2005 wasn't different from 2020. It was, but not as strikingly different as, say, I don't know, 1965 might have been, and what people have to say about that. And I think there we probably would see significant differences. Here we see just pretty much identical results. So I think some of the takeaways from this are that human beings, in terms of their inclinations, are far more robust than we're led to believe. I've said this before, but we're getting skewed sampling when we look at the effects of Tinder, right? People who participate in Tinder, especially the successful ones, the people who really enjoy it, are by nature more libidinous, more promiscuous, and the people who wouldn't participate in Tinder are the people that wouldn't touch such an app. But because Tinder is really popular and blown up in our faces, we get the sense that this is some kind of all-encompassing, overwhelming force that has forever changed the dating market. Now, there are other things like OnlyFans and Twitch, but that's something distinct from this. So again, we have to be clear about how human beings are, and generally speaking, there are going to be differences across human beings and how they decide to pursue certain things, specifically mating and dating. And if anything, this shows us that it's reasonably consistent, especially as people get older and realize it's just not worth the effort and they could be doing other things. I'll be posting a link to the article below. And again, we should all be wary of self-reporting and pew polls, but nonetheless, I think it's very interesting to check out and get a sense of. Please hit the bell icon in case you haven't done so to be notified of my videos. If you haven't subbed yet, a subscription would be much appreciated. Do share the video. And as always, may the gods watch over you. If I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.